quite openly Jewish. This is a pro-Palestinian march. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I'm worried about the reaction to your presence.
That was a pretty outrageous statement by a Met police officer, seemingly threatening to arrest someone for being openly Jewish at a pro-Palestine protest. Now, that clip, understandably, caused a large media storm. The police were under fire after their threat to arrest an openly Jewish man near pro-Palestinian protest, openly Jewish being the term used by the police. And some of the sharpest criticism, as you can imagine, came from right-wing outlets on Talk TV. This was former Met detective turned pundit Peter Bleksley.
The Metropolitan Police's mask has not slipped, it has fallen to the ground. The Metropolitan Police quite clearly have chosen a side here, and it is not the side of the moderate. It is not the side of the mainstream. It is the side of the mob.
Criticism also made its way onto the BBC. This was Laura Kuenssberg speaking to Government Minister Claire Coutinho on Sunday.
Just finally, there's been a building story in the last couple of days that we've mentioned already this morning about the Met's treatment of a Jewish man who was appeared while a pro-Palestinian rally was taking place, who a policeman essentially told him he shouldn't be there. Can you confirm that the Home Secretary has written to the Met Commissioner about what's happened here?
He has, but let me say that I think what has happened is a serious misstep, because what we can't be saying to particular groups in society that their very presence is a provocation. You don't want anybody of any community to feel like that, which is how the Jewish community has been made to feel.
The Jewish man in question, he's called Gideon Falter, was also given a large personal platform. He appeared on Sky News on Saturday.
We've waited 6 months for the Met to take control of these crowds, take control of the streets, make London safe for Londoners, for law-abiding Londoners. And he's failed to do that. And I think the time has come now for Mark Rowley to go. He should either resign or he should be removed by the Mayor and the Home Secretary. If it were an isolated incident, if it had taken place shortly after the war, I might accept that there was some kind of mishap, officers on the ground, several officers on the ground getting the wrong end of the stick, but that's not what it is. This has been happening as part of a pattern of behaviour now. And finally it's on film. Finally people are paying attention to it.
Gideon Falter repeated that call for the Met Commissioner to resign in an article in the Sunday Times. So it's headlined, "I was treated like a criminal for being Jewish. The Met chief must go." And then this is important because it says, pelted with insults like scum and Nazi after stumbling across a march. The leader of the campaign against anti-Semitism was told he could be arrested. Now, remember that claim about stumbling across the march. Of course, we should be absolutely clear. What the policeman in that clip we showed you at the start said to Gideon Falter is completely unacceptable. No one should be told that because they are openly or visibly Jewish, they might breach the peace and therefore should leave a public space. It was a terrible thing to say. But there was also something deeply misleading about this story, right? Because Gideon Falter has told the press he merely stumbled upon the march. And it's that idea that has tarred not only the police officer who said something wrong, but also the protesters themselves. Because if the mere presence of an openly Jewish person at a pro-Palestine march could cause a breach of the peace, then maybe these marches really do seem like festivals of anti-Semitism. The problem with that narrative, though, is this. Gideon Falter didn't just stumble upon the march. In fact, he was standing right next to a pro-Israeli counter-protest. And he was very intentionally trying to provoke a reaction. Now, we can confirm this because Sky News on Sunday published a full 13 minutes filmed by their own crew, which adds much more context than was included in the clip uploaded by Falter's campaign group. Now, in what you're about to see, the police officer gives the background to the clash with Falter that the campaign against anti-Semitism put out.
And even though you're very difficult, so my view is you are looking to try and antagonise us. No, you weren't. You chose to leave the so I can already see what your mindset is, sir.
My mindset?
Yeah, I'm trying not to be too disingenuous with this.
My mindset is that I'm Jewish in London. And
Please don't be too disingenuous, sir.
I'm not being disingenuous. I can walk wherever the hell I want.
I'm afraid you
if
are.
I want to walk to that paper, that's what I'm going to do.
Sir,
But
if you
you're
stay
going to
there,
have to
please.
arrest me because I'm walking.
I'd rather not do that.
You might wonder, watching that, why was the police officer so sure that Folter was being disingenuous? We've been told by multiple people that on that demonstration, Folter was hanging out very close to a pro-Israel counter-protest. Now, if you've been on a pro-Palestine march and seen the pro-Israeli counter-protest, I'm guessing not many of our viewers go on these pro-Israeli counter-protests. They're the kind of sort of demonstration where people are waving Israeli flags, they shout terrorist supporters and Hamas lovers at people who are on the pro-Palestine march, who are protesting against genocide. And if you're on that pro-Palestine march, you're going to see the people waving Israeli flags as somewhat distasteful, right? And that's the point. It's designed precisely to be provocative. Those counter demonstrations are pretty much there to provoke, or to attempt to provoke, the people on the pro-Palestine demos. And provocation is clearly what Folter sought. This is another part of that Sky film.
You're telling me that I cannot walk to the other paper.
I'm telling you
that I have to be
that I will
escorted
help
by
you by escorting you over there. And that way you will be completely safe, just as we promised. So we're keeping our word.
I'm only safe basically if I have a police force. Is that what you're saying?
I think I'm offering it to you, sir. I've already seen you deliberately leave the paper and walk against this march. You chose to do
I was
that.
trying to get to the other side
sir,
of the road.
your comment
I was trying
about
to get to the other side of the
is
road.
disingenuous.
How
You
do
like it or
How do you
not?
want me to get to the other side
I
of the road?
will quite happily walk you over there.
I'm not trying to go
When you
there,
get
I'm
over
going
there.
Gideon Folter has an obvious interest in provoking reactions from pro-Palestine protesters. He's a founder of the Campaign Against Antisemitism, which appears to many to have been set up largely to smear anti-Zionists as anti-Semites. He's also a board member of the Jewish National Fund, which was set up to help Jews gain control of Arab land in Palestine. And someone who saw straight through the strategy was Ben Jamal from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. He said this to Sky News.
He suggested he was innocently going for a walk, came across the march and was asked to leave because he was openly Jewish. The reality was he came to the march with an entourage of 4 to 5 people and a film crew, sought to break through the stewards, physically push himself past the police in order to walk in front of the march, to provoke and to try to stop it. He was trying to provoke a confrontation. That's what people need also to be aware of who Mr. Folter is and the organisation he represents. They're a deeply controversial organisation. They were highly criticised shortly after it was set up by a parliamentary inquiry into anti-Semitism. They were criticised on the basis that they were deliberately conflating anti-Semitism with legitimate criticism of the actions of the Israeli state. They've also been heavily criticised for a stream of Islamophobic comments, including smears against the Mayor of London, and for using anti-Palestinian racist rhetoric. Since the marches have begun, the organisation have tried to stop them. They've even called for the army to be brought onto the streets to stop the marches happening. Now they're using the tactic of coming to the marches, trying to provoke an incident so that they can say there are scenes of disorder and therefore the marches cannot go ahead.
So for his part, Gideon Folter has denied he was part of a counter-protest. He said he didn't come with a video crew, and he's maintained that he simply was taking a walk after attending a synagogue. Now, others have pointed out the demonstration was over 2 kilometres away from the closest synagogue, so it would have had to have been a fairly long walk. Folter on Sky didn't appreciate going head-to-head with Ben Jamal.
The problem with Mr. Folter's presence was not that he is openly Jewish. He's not dealing with the fact that at every single march, there are thousands of Jewish people marching, many of them in an organised...
Not. What rubbish.
They're in an organised block, in a Jewish block. They are warmly welcomed at every demonstration. Some of them have put out public statements disassociating themselves with what Mr. Folter and his organisation were doing at the last march. So that's
Let him come back to you on that.
First of all, I don't want to continue having a conversation with Ben Jamal. I'm happy to have an interview with you, but I don't want to carry on.
You did want to come on and talk.
Right. No. I'm not criticising UK.
That you wanted to have the conversation.
I did want to
Final
reply
thought
to
from
what
you
said.
then, Ben Jamal, if I may. Hold on one second.
Now that might strike you as the actions and the attitude of someone whose story is falling apart. Former Chief Superintendent of the Met Police, Del Babu, did not himself agree with Falter's take on the event.
You saw Mr. Falter trying to push police officers out of the way. I mean, that is a common assault. I think you're getting a more accurate picture of what was happening. I think the police dealt with it, tried to be as sensitive as possible. I think the police officer was offering to take Mr. Falter and his group to a place where they could cross more appropriately. Mr. Falter was refusing to move and wanted to cross at that particular place against the march. So I think we're getting a more accurate picture of what's happening. But this is perhaps important for news outlets to ensure that they get an accurate picture. The 13 minutes that the Sky released is very helpful. And I've been asking all weekend since this incident came up, can we see the full footage as opposed to bits that have been edited or placed by Mr. Falter and his supporters?
Now, we are really lucky, actually, that Sky did release that footage, because what happens here, I don't know if Gideon Falter has done it before, but I think we have, people have been aware of this for a while now. We see it in America as well, actually. Is what you get someone who is very pro-Israel, who goes to a demo, and they can spend hours filming footage of speaking both to police officers and people on the demonstration. And then what they do is they find 10 seconds where it makes a protester or a police person look really bad, right? And as we said, that 10 seconds of that police officer at the start of this segment that we showed you, that was bad, right? He said, you look visibly Jewish, and so therefore you might cause a scene, right? Now, that was a bad thing to say, but if you film enough people for a long enough period of time, you're going to find some of them, one of them saying something wrong over a course of a day, right? And so that's often what happens here. Someone goes and does something that they know is going to be provocative. Now, it's important to say it wasn't provocative because he was openly Jewish. It was provocative because he is openly very pro-Israel, right? That's why it was provocative. That's why the police officer was telling him not to walk through the march in the opposite direction of the marchers, right? Which, so that guy was looking for that. And I think that ex-copper there sort of saying, the media, when they get shown this 10-second clip, they maybe should think about the context, because if it hadn't been for that 13-minute Sky clip, this could still be, the top news story, which is being sort of swallowed uncritically by everyone. So, this could have gone another way. What's interesting, though, in this case, is that Gideon Falter seems to be somewhat isolated even on his side, right? So even the government's own advisor on anti-Semitism has come out and said he doesn't believe Falter was being totally honest.
Mr. Falter would perhaps disagree with you, suggesting that he was there purely to protest. He would argue that he was simply walking in London, and he was stopped from doing so, because he was openly Jewish.
No, let's be quite clear. That is not true. He wasn't just walking in London. It's Shabbat at the time, so the Jewish religious time, and he's been there before at the protests. He's been quite explicit. Before he went on this protest, he'd already called publicly for Sir Mark Rowley to be sacked. There's no ambiguity in what he's doing. Well, let me show you how he operates. Let me show you this. His organisation has, for the last 6 months, blocked me on from seeing their social media. Now, I'm the independent advisor to government on anti-Semitism. They have other objectives in this. If you're going to block people like myself from seeing your social media, you're not playing it straight.
Now, John Mann is not left-wing by any accounts. Now, I would say that John Mann was someone who likes to smear people who are anti-Israel as being anti-Semitic. So if Gideon Falter is even too extreme for John Mann, right? He was a Labour MP. You might have recognised him. He was the one who was sort of screaming at Ken Livingstone outside the Sky building that you're a Nazi apologist. is what he was screaming at him. He was very, very vocal in the Corbyn years, and even he thinks that Gideon Falter is too extreme to be listened to. Helena, what have you made of this? I suppose, we've shown a lot of mainstream clips there of people sort of outing Gideon Falter for what he is. So people might say, well, it's all the wrong has been righted. But still, I suppose we had a few days in the media of people sort of suggesting, oh my God, these demonstrations are so anti-Semitic that if you merely bump into one, if you stumble upon a demonstration while you're wearing a kippah or any other sort of visible symbol of being Jewish, then you're suddenly going to cause a scene. I mean, how irresponsible was the reporting on this?
I mean, that's what I think was so wild to me, is that the original clip, as we showed, as you rightly pointed out beforehand, the sentence is obviously, there is some ambiguity as to what you can take as being the intent of saying that I'm worried about the reaction there would be to you being openly Jewish there. And I'm like, well, that sounds to me like an impugning of the protesters and saying, well, there are anti-Semites over there. Like, if you go there, they might feel like they're provoked because of their innate anti-Semitism. But I think there's some ambiguity there in the statement, regardless of the intent, was clearly wrong. But it just shows you how far these things can go round, not just in the mainstream media, but across social media, and validate everybody's priors without full context, because it's been deliberately cut in a specific context to make a specific point. You talked beforehand in the statements that you made there in the coverage about how there's been plenty of instances of people engaging in anti-Semitism who've been on pro-Palestine protests that have been gone around social media and have been used to be able to tar the entire protest movement as being one of anti-Semitism, when we all know that's not true. Again, what Ben was talking about before with regards to this broad kind of Jewish engagement and the blocks they have on these protests that have been warmly welcomed, which is also true. Just like any large numbers of people, millions of people over the course of the last 6 months marching week after week after week, right? There's bound to be some people there who are genuine anti-Semites, but they are, in isolated instance, cannot be used as a singular brush to tar everybody. But that's, of course, what people who are oppose in the pro-Palestine movement want everybody else to think about them, because it's a way of being able to avoid discussion of the real issues that we see every day on our phones as well. What I wanted to mention too, is this important bit of context here as well. When there was the discussion between Mr. Falter and the police officer, like the provocation the officer was talking about that we saw in the longer clip and the kind of the longer thing that Sky News released, is this idea, well, you went into protest and then you walked against the protest or the march, I guess it is. And if you're not somebody who's been on many marches, like, it's worth pointing out that one of the key things about a march is you have to keep moving. You have to keep moving towards the end point to maintain order, so that there's along the designated march route, and you can't just stand around and mingle forever apart from at the end point, because that could shut down however much of London forever. And so it's actually against the kind of the rules, I guess, of how we do this march, is for anybody to be walking against that current. And so if you're doing that, you're either doing it because you're engaging in something that is against the rules of the march itself, or you're deliberately trying to provoke a reaction from the people who are there. Again, if you just wanted to get to the other side of the road, when the police officer said, well, actually, there's a march going on there, this designated route, I can take you around another way with escort if you want. And then you continually to deliberately say, no, I have to go through this march very specifically, magically with a camera crew, so that's suddenly you haven't been able to film that, and with your security there, it doesn't seem to be entirely legitimate to me. And then suddenly he's having a media round. This guy who is already part of multiple organizations, one obviously campaign against anti-Semitism, regardless of the actions of the people who run the campaign, a noble cause which everybody can agree with to stop anti-Semitism, but also one in which, as you mentioned before, is allegedly funding or helping to allow there to be more land grabs of Palestine. Suddenly he has the ability, after this clip goes around, for him to be on doing the media round on Sky, on LBC, on Good Morning Britain, to give only his side of the story, apart from when he's been debating Ben Jamal. And this has allowed him to be able to get much more of visibility for the kind of the side of the narrative that he wants to push, which is, again, I think it is not particularly good form for this all to have happened before we'd all seen the real context.
We've said, in one way, the relief here is that many in the media seem to have woken up to what was really going on here. However, the bad news, despite the full footage of Falter's confrontation with the police having been released, politicians are still pretending they haven't really seen it, right? Instead, they're making political capital out of what appears to have been a deliberate provocation. Can you imagine? This was Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
I share the shock and the anger that many are feeling when they saw the clips over the weekend. And, you know, what I would say about Mark Rowley and the police, they do have a difficult job. Of course, I appreciate that. But what happened was clearly wrong. And it's right that they've apologised for that. And yes, I do have confidence in him, but that's on the basis that he works to rebuild the confidence and trust of not just the Jewish community, but the wider public, particularly people in London, but more broadly. And you regain that trust and that confidence by making it clear that the police are not tolerating behaviour that we would all collectively deem unacceptable when we see it, because it undermines our values.
They weren't tolerating behaviour that we would see as, I think, unacceptable, which is turning up to a protest deliberately to try and provoke a reaction, right? You get this from both sides. So what the police always do, you know, if you have a far-right demonstration and then left-wing anti-racist protesters, the police's main job is always to keep them apart because they don't want to see, you know, fights in the streets, public disorder. And I think that's a kind of policing that does actually have quite widespread consent. I think people think, you know, we want people to be able to get their voices heard, but we don't want, you know, just people fighting in the street. We don't want chaos. We don't want disorder. So please keep them apart. And that's often, you know, really their big job on some of those days is just to keep people apart. And so the police were, in this case, doing their job quite well. Now, we should be clear, he phrased it badly, right? The sentence he said was wrong, but the intention was actually quite noble, and he carried it out, apart from that one sentence, quite well. So the idea that, you know, they need to regain trust because of this incident seems to me a little bit misguided, other than that, you know, they need to be careful with the language they use. Labour's Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson appeared on Sky News. She said this.
Should Sir Mark Rowley resign? I don't think that's the answer. I think what we've seen in terms of that video that you've been showing and what took place subsequently was evidently completely unacceptable. I think the Met now have a job of work to do to make sure that they rebuild trust with the Jewish community. I understand they're meeting with community leaders today to do precisely that. The police have got a difficult job, and policing protest isn't easy, and there will be occasions where things go wrong. But I think it's completely unacceptable if Jewish people feel unsafe on our streets, and there can be no place for anti-Semitism on any kind of march or on our streets or within our society. But the Met do have a responsibility to balance that, you know, to make sure that people have the right to protest, but ensuring that it doesn't cross a line.
Blah, 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 blah. That's classic, like, Labour politician. I'm going to spend a minute saying absolutely nothing. So I'm sorry we wasted 45 seconds of your time by showing you that, to be honest, but there we are. One politician who was a bit more forthright, you know, at least she said something, even if it was completely bizarre and wrong, was Home Secretary Suella Braverman. She's very expert at this, saying bold things which are wrong. Over the weekend, she called for Met Commissioner Mark Rowley to resign. And on Radio 4's Today programme, she was asked to justify that call.
The incident involving a man being called openly Jewish by a Metropolitan Police officer. You've called for the Metropolitan Police chief to go. Can I ask, have you seen the whole video involving Gideon Falter?
I've seen clips of the videos have been published, but this is more about what's happened over the last 6 months.
The whole video has been published by Sky News. There's 13 minutes of it, and in the footage, Gideon Falter insists that he's only trying to cross the road down which the demonstration is passing, but that's disputed by an officer who has a lengthy exchange with him, including offering to lead him out in a different direction, and essentially accuses him of being disingenuous and seeking to antagonise the marchers. I wonder if that changes your position at all, because police officers do have a duty, don't they, to keep the peace, which is the conclusion that many come to after watching the footage.
Well, My complaint is not against the individual police officers. They are all working really hard in really difficult circumstances. My complaint is the wholesale failure to combat anti-Semitism and to maintain the peace on the streets of London over the last 6 months. There's been a failure.
It was this incident, wasn't it, that sparked your call for the Metropolitan Police Chief to resign or be sacked?
This incident shines a light on what has been happening.
But you haven't seen the video of the whole incident.
What the video shows and what the incident demonstrates is that the police have failed to strike the right balance of competing rights. Now, I support the right to peaceful protest, but if the police themselves, and this is what the video shows, consider that there is a risk of anti-Semitic attacks on a Jewish person, if they consider that threat to exist, what they've chosen to do, and this is where I believe they've gone wrong in the strategy and the leadership, they've chosen to say to the innocent Jewish person that that person must give up their rights and they'll be arrested if they don't.
We've all seen the clip, Suella. Like, it had been out for 24 hours. She's called for the Met Commissioner to resign. That's not a small ask, right? It's not like me tweeting, oh, this clip's troubling. She's the former Home Secretary. She said, I don't know much about Mark Rowley, but presumably he's worked his whole life to get that job. Got the job. And she said, I've watched a 7-second clip and he should resign. And then she's asked, well, there is a 13-minute clip where you can see the content. No, I haven't watched it, but I'm talking about actually a broader issue, which is that if they think you're not safe because you're Jewish and so you can't walk down, well, the bigger video shows that that's not what they think. Clearly, the longer video shows the reason the police officer thinks that man would not be safe walking through the demonstration is because he is trying to provoke people and he is standing close to a pro-Israel demonstration. The reason he might not be safe is not because he's Jewish. The police officer will know very well that there are lots of Jewish people on that march, right? The reason he's going to be unsafe is because he's a pro-Israel activist. Now, as we keep saying, he used a wrong sentence, but the idea that a police officer using a wrong sentence while doing, I think, what is on the whole an honourable job in this situation, the reason that a Met Commissioner should resign for that seems a little bit disproportionate to me. And that interview went on.
I suggest that perhaps you should watch. I suggest that you should perhaps watch the whole video before deciding exactly what you think the risks were.
This is really important that I have a chance to say this because this is a really important issue. That cannot be the right approach to handling this problem. The right approach, if the police consider there to be an anti-Semitic threat, which is clear from the video and clear from all of these marches, is that the police must confront that threat directly head on. And the police must be going to those people who they believe may be threatening to attack this person for being Jewish, anti-Semitically. They must direct their concerns at those people and say, if you attack this Jewish person,
I think
you'll be arrested.
I think
the video clearly does not show that.
You haven't seen the whole video.
I have seen enough of the video.
I have seen enough of the video to know that the protesters were threatening to attack the Jewish man anti-Semitically, which is a construction I haven't heard before. That was an ex-Home Secretary, very much out of her depth. I have to say credit to Michelle Hussein, I think, who conducted that interview very impressively, because to go on the radio and say, I have seen enough of the video, he should resign, and then you're being asked, well, have you seen the actual context for what happened? No, but he should resign. I mean, that would be a resigning offence if she was still Home Secretary. She is an ex-Home Secretary. She might be the leader of the opposition one day. Let's have our fingers crossed that we won't be subjected to that.